Most business owners make the process of scaling a business far more difficult than it needs to be. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 automations that you need to set up in your business. I'm going to show you how to do it step by step. So by the end of this video, you will have automated these 3 main roles. These 3 main roles are the roles that the majority of business owners bury themselves in, and it causes them to never scale their business. You ultimately are faced with 2 roles in business. Either you keep doing the task yourself or you hire a staff member. Well, there's a new way of doing things, and that comes down to automations and using systems to do the workload for you so you never have to bury yourself again. Let's dive into it and start off with the first one. Now, the first and simplest task to automate in your business is just automating every single time you sign up a new client. In business, we want to try and increase our prices over time, but one of the limiting factors that stops us doing that is our ability to onboard clients with ease. The minute that we push prices up, the higher the expectations are of the clients that we sign up. So we don't want to give them a chance to have buyer's remorse and ask for refunds. So instead, we want to set up a simple system that will onboard clients for us without us lifting a finger. Now, I'm not talking about automating your actual delivery, but all of the steps around that so you have more time to focus on the parts that clients are actually paying for. Clients aren't paying for you to do all of the admin, they're paying for a result. And if we can automate all of the admin so you have more time and headspace to focus on getting results, you'll be able to coach more clients, you'll be able to charge more, and you'll be able to make more money from less workload. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to head into a software called Zapier. Zapier is essentially this software that connects different softwares together. So instead of having someone pay us money on Stripe and then us having to go over to another software to add a client and onboard them, we can use Zapier to connect the 2 together. It's essentially the bridge. So inside Zapier, we can create a Zap, and in our Zap, what we want to do is we want to have a trigger and then an action after that. Now, the way that this works is we set a trigger when this thing happens, and then we set a series of actions, do these steps afterwards. So for example, chances are you would probably have the trigger of Stripe. When someone pays us money in Stripe, we trigger the automation. Now we can go into here and we can select what we want the trigger to be. So for example, there's a couple things to think about. When we add a client to Stripe, if we manually add them, manually add their card, and then manually charge their card, Stripe actually take a higher percentage. As opposed to if we have a payment link that we either fill out on behalf of the client on the sales call or send to them on the sales call to fill out on the call, that then takes a lower percent. So in an ideal situation, we would then have a payment link. We can go into Stripe, create a product, create a payment link, and then that payment link is what we use to get people to sign up with. We can choose checkout session completed, ultimately meaning when someone goes through a payment link, trigger this automation. What we then want to do down here is where it says select, we can then select our Stripe account. If you haven't selected your account already, you can literally click here, log in, and then your Stripe account is connected into Zapier, and then it means that then all of the automations will trigger. I'm going to pause this, connect my account, and then we'll continue on. So you'll see that I've connected my Stripe account. We've currently got 46 automations running from our Stripe account. If we then go continue, you'll then see that it will pull up this screen. We can click test trigger. If I click test trigger, it will then pull through a recent checkout through one of our payment links. So you would click test trigger, it will pull through a recent client's details, their name, their emails, their phone number, the amount that they signed up for, the subscription interval that they signed up for if they signed up to a subscription. So click test trigger. Now, once we've set up the trigger, we want to set up a series of actions after this. But you're probably going to ask the question of, well, I've got different products, different price points that I sign clients up onto. That's fine. Here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to add an action, and in this action, we can choose paths. In these paths, we can then rename each path to a certain product or price point. So let's say you have a price point that's £100. Let's say you have another price point that's £1,000. What this then allows us to do is we can click into the path. We can then choose if the amount of money that a client pays us equals this amount, then go down this path. If the amount of money that a client pays us equals £1,000, for example, then go down this path. That then means that we can essentially get the automation to have logic and then think about what the steps are. So just like a human being would, when a client onboards, they'd look at it and go, right, they paid me £100, let me onboard them like this. This person's paid £1,000, let me onboard them like this. Well, we can just get an automation to do that for us instead for literally zero money to run every single month. So what we'd want to do is under condition, we could click here and we could choose text contains, and we could then type in 100. Then under 1,000, we could do the same, text contains, we could do 1,000. And then what we'd want to do is if we click choose field, what this will then do is it will then pull through our test from earlier. What we then want to do is we just want to look through all of the data that it's pulled through and find the thing that has the price. So it will say the pound sign or whatever currency you do, and then the amount. It doesn't need to match the amount, don't worry. You just need to select the field that has a pound sign or a dollar sign, whatever currency you have, and then the amount of money. What that will then mean is the automation will then check the amount that they pay from Stripe, and it will check if it's £100, it then goes down here. It will check if it's £1,000, it will then go down here. That then means we can move on to the next step of then building out the workflow for each section. Now, in order to automate the next steps of the onboarding process, all we now need to do is figure out what are the steps that we would take manually to onboard a client, and we just automate them. And the cool thing with Zapier is all we do is we set the actions out. So for example, step 1, we click here and we might know that we add them to an email marketing software like ActiveCampaign. We go into ActiveCampaign, we then choose what action do we want. Do we just want to update them or add a tag onto them, for example? So you could go create or update contact. You'll then select your account, and then the cool thing with this is if I pause this, I'll show you the next steps. So once you've selected your account on ActiveCampaign, you will then see that we have a series of data that we can update. Emails, first names, full names, phone numbers, tags, different organizations. What we can do is if we click this plus icon, again, it will pull through all of the data from earlier in the automation. So we could then choose, right, if we click number 1, it will pull through an example of a recent sign up. We can then select their email from there. We can then come into here, we can select their first name, we can then select their last name, we can select their full name, we can select their phone number. And then what that means is the automation will always then pull that custom data through to then update that. And I think a lot of people get confused because they think that, well, is it then always going to be the same client? No, it's not. That's a custom field. So it will update every single time. And then every single time someone goes through the checkout, that will then re-trigger this, pull through the new data, filter, and then update accordingly. So it then means that you set it up once, you turn it on, you just leave it and it runs. What that then also means is you can then continue the steps afterwards to add the next step, add the next software, choose the next action, and then continue building out your onboarding process to the point that all of the steps that you're currently doing now are automated, and you're then just focusing on actually fulfilling and delivering the service rather than the admin. Now, the next step that we need to build out is a pipeline in order to manage all of the leads that we have coming through. That onboarding automation is going to be pointless unless we have a way of tracking all of the leads coming through so we actually have the ability to sell them. A lot of the time in the sales process, the sales journey will happen before someone actually books in a call and before someone even gets on that call. So what we want to do is we want to have automations in place so that then we can pump lead volume in and we have far less workload to do in order to manage that. The way that we do that is having a pipeline built out. This is our all-in-one CRM software that will replace a huge bunch of different softwares in your business for a fraction of the cost. However, you could use any software to have a pipeline built out like this. We essentially need a pipeline to show us leads that apply, leads that schedule calls, leads that sign up into clients, leads that no-show, leads that cancel calls, and then people who need following up manually, and then people who are lost leads and unconverted that we can then follow up. What we then do in our system is we basically have a Zapier equivalent in the platform, which then allows us to set up all of the automations to follow up with them. However, if you were to use Zapier, what you would want to do is build a certain follow-up to then follow up accordingly when someone's moved into the appropriate column. So a software that can work similar to this in terms of just the pipeline is Trello. So what our platform does is it will replace all of the softwares in your business. Trello is just one of the softwares it would replace. So if you just want a pipeline, you could use Trello. You could build the columns out on Trello to represent leads that apply, leads that schedule calls, leads that sign up into clients, leads that no-show, those that cancel, those that need following up, and those that are lost. Then inside Zapier, what you can do is you can trigger in Trello when someone is moved to a certain column. So you can then trigger when a card is moved to a certain list to then trigger an automation. And then what that then allows you to do is you can then build out the follow-up sequences afterwards. So with a software like ours, we can do WhatsApp automations, SMS automations, email automations all within it. With something like Trello, you could then create a makeshift version using a Trello board with your different columns, and then you could add in ActiveCampaign to then have a follow-up sequence in ActiveCampaign between different SMS emails, between different channels like SMS and email. However, we have found a massive increase in terms of conversions using WhatsApp, which we do natively through our platform, or you can use something like Wati to then automate WhatsApp messages. So that it then means that you can then automate a whole sequence of steps off the back of someone if they say apply, but then maybe don't book in their sales call. Once they book in their sales calls, those follow-up steps stop, and then they just get the appropriate nurture sequences before their call. If leads cancel, they then automatically get followed up to get rebooked back in, and then the follow-up stopped. So essentially all these steps that for majority of businesses are like a bucket with holes in, they just leak out. We plug those gaps, and then we can use follow-up sequences in order to be able to run that at scale instead of having to manually do all those steps ourselves. Now, the next step for any business in order to scale their lead flow so they can book more sales calls, because it's pointless having that whole pipeline built out and the follow-up sequences in place if you don't get anyone to the point of actually booking in a call, is building the appropriate chat sequences. So instead of us having to outbound to everyone, we can get inbound leads straight into our DMs. It's using something like ManyChat, or in our platform, we do the same thing all in the platform instead of needing to pay for ManyChat. For example, inside our platform, we have what we call is STS chat, and we build out the appropriate follow-up sequences to then run that whole channel on social media channels like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So the whole goal with this is we then have a trigger in place when people DM us a keyword or when people comment a keyword on a post. That not only turns a lead from viewing content to an inbound lead, but what it also then does is push engagement even more on our content. Off the back of this, the system then automatically replies to that lead, and you're probably going to say, well, is that not going to sound robotic? No, because then we can have a list of numerous different replies. So then the system will randomly pick one of the replies each time instead of just using the same thing over and over again. So it doesn't look robotic. We add them to a pipeline so we can track them, we tag them so we can track them, then we send back a message on Instagram. Now, when we send that best message back on Instagram, what we want to do is we want to ask them for their email. Instead of us then sending people off onto a link away from Instagram, we want to keep them in the DMs. We've done the hard work getting them into the DMs. We just now need to keep them in the DMs because that's where we're going to convert them. If we can keep them in conversations, we're going to book more calls, we're going to make more sales. If we're sending them off to different links, that's taking them away from where we want them to be. So we want to ask for their email. If they don't reply within an hour to this message, we then basically have a follow-up that then follows up to nudge the message up their inbox and updates them appropriately on the pipeline so we know they've been followed up. When they then reply to us, we then essentially check if they have sent their email. If they have sent their email, we then deliver the resource in the DMs there and there, and then we save their email into our email list and they go into an email sequence. So then that way we're also building an asset list away from Instagram, and we're then also creating a conversation as an inbound lead instead of us having to try and outbound to everyone. Works incredibly well because our content can then actually start driving conversations, and conversations will then lead to calls, and we can do that in our platform, or you can use something like ManyChat in order to do that. And in ManyChat, if you go into ManyChat, you'll then see that they have a bunch of pre-built automations that you can then use, and you can explore from all of the templates. And then what this then means is you can auto DM links from comments, so you can then essentially send people a message off the back of their comment asking for their email, then delivering the resource essentially in the framework that I've just showed you. If you combine those three things, you will then be able to pull yourself out of a huge amount of tasks and actually focus on scaling the traffic into the system rather than getting stuck and trying to manage all of those steps yourself. Now, the reason most businesses get stuck isn't because lack of knowledge, it isn't because lack of effort, it's because of lack of hours in the day. And if you're trying to do all of those tasks yourself on top of everything else that you have to do in order to run a profitable business, you are essentially shooting yourself in the foot before you've even begun. If you implement those three simple automated systems, you will pull yourself out of 80% of the workload that you're probably doing right now and allow you to focus on the key components of driving more revenue, which is pushing more traffic into the systems, and retaining more clients so then you have even better retention. If you plug those gaps, you'll be able to scale your business far quicker than everyone else because you're not just relying on the hours in a day.